Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Ian Perez, and welcome to another installment of the Greysheet podcast. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Dennis Hengeveld of World Banknote Auctions. Before we jump in, please be sure to visit our previous interviews and podcasts on the Greysheet YouTube channel, and be sure to visit our website at www.greysheet.com to view all of our tremendous resources. Dennis, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
So before we jump into the meat of the interview, what's your back? I love asking people what their background in numismatics is, and how they found their way into this hobby and into this business. So, what's your story? Were you a collector when you were younger, or?
Yeah, I've always been a collector. I was one of those kids that would collect rocks and collect, whatever to get his hands on. And then when I was 7 or 8, my grandmother gave me an old Dutch coin. I grew up in the Netherlands, so I have no idea where she got it. It was a 19th century 2.5-cent piece. I still have it. It piqued my interest, and I kind of just got started into that. Collected Dutch coins for a while, collected world coins as a kid. People would give me stuff they brought back from vacation, and at the time, every country in Europe had its different currency. There was no euro yet, so I would have stacks and stacks of coins and put it in my album and identify them and did all that. That kind of kept on going until I was about 15, I think, and I discovered U.S. coins. Got really into U.S. coins. Started talking to U.S. collectors on the internet, and that kind of evolved. And I've been active in the business ever since.
Well, that's cool. So you got into U.S. coins while in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and it was a weird thing. I remember for my birthday, I had to pick. Obviously, I wanted to pick a birthday present, and I had just found this numismatic bookseller in the Netherlands, and they were selling, books from all over the world. And I'd always had an interest in U.S. history and all that. So I ended up getting a red book. And that's, that started the whole thing where I collected Washington quarters. I collected Lincoln cents. Doing it from Europe was a lot more difficult than it was, doing it here. Obviously I couldn't go through my chains and anything like that, but yeah, it was just always interested in U.S. history, and that kind of just came along, and I jumped right in.
Very cool, very cool. So obviously your company is called World Banknote Auctions. How did you find your way into paper money?
So I realized I started a coin company, VOC Numismatics, probably about 10 years now. And that did, the idea was that kind of be like a coin dealer with more advanced world coins, not as much US coins, because I realized that I did not have the capital for that, nor did I want to compete with every other coin dealer in the country. That kind of just hobbled along until I started buying some world paper, and I realized that there were not a lot of people doing it. Complete opposite scenario. I realized that there was a very active collector community, and I decided to just jump in. So then I started selling on eBay initially, and I would host auctions every 7 days. Eventually that was 3 times a week. And about January 2021, we made the leap and started our own website, and haven't looked back since.
Awesome. Yeah, very similar to me. I was never a coin collector, and I fell in love with paper money when I first saw my first note when I was, I think, 15, and I was like, wow, this is so different. And then as you learn kind of more mature about the market, you're like, wow, there's a lot of opportunity here because there's so much that's not known.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So you mentioned you started a coin company. When did you realize that you wanted to make your hobby into like a profession, into a career, or try?
I don't think I ever had a realization. It just kind of came along. When I moved here from the Netherlands, while I was going to school, I started working part-time in a coin shop. Just because that was my interest, and that's kind of what I knew. And even before that, I had dabbled a little bit in buying and selling, and I would come over to U.S. coin shows fairly regularly from Europe, and I buy and sell a little bit here and there. It just kind of evolved naturally. I mean, there's no path. I never made a conscious decision. This is what I want to do. it just came natural, and it's what I enjoy, and I think I just subconsciously realized that. And that there was never a point like I'm going to quit my job to start a coin business. There was the point where I moved to the US and went from there. That was probably the most conscious decision that came along with that.
Sure, absolutely. So you said 2021, you kind of transitioned from eBay to forming an actual auction firm. Um, can you talk a little bit more about the actual founding of World Banknote Auctions and how has it been so far?
Well, the founding was a little forced, and I don't want to throw any companies under the bus, but a payment provider that was very closely associated with eBay decided that they did not want to do any business with us. I never found out why. I never found out the reasoning. My attorney sent letters. Eventually, it got overturned within a month. But that kind of just forced me to jump off eBay and jump on my own website, which I had already. It was one of those things that made preparations for it, and I knew I wanted to do it. That final leap was too scary, too big, until I was actually forced to do it, and so that's when it happened. So basically, initially, the concept was the same as what we did on eBay. So it would be, very regular auctions, all graded material, all world notes, all pretty much starting at $10 and going from there. That worked out really well. It did really well on eBay, and it did really well on our website, that we started getting more and more calls for consignments. And I was even on eBay, I was taking some consignments, but because of their fee structure, it just made it very difficult.
Right.
It just, that's how it works. I mean, and it's hard to compete with the traditional auction firms when you have to charge a consigner instead of offering 0%. So with our own website, we got that hurdle out of the way, and we've literally pretty much grown explosively, I'd almost say, over the past 2 years now. Where when I think our first auction, I think 80% was our own material. Now at this point, if I have 5 or 10 notes that I personally bought at a show in our auction, that's all it is. So it has really transitioned into more traditional auction house consignments, the whole what you would expect from a normal auction house, as opposed to a mom and pop eBay seller.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations. It's your sales have been getting lots of traction, and I look at them regularly myself, and you always have some really interesting notes and very cool material lately. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
So Dennis, about a year and a half ago, Greysheet acquired the Banknote Book, and we've been pushing like crazy to get more exposure. We've been traveling, talking to people about it. Obviously, there was some awareness of it before, but I've been really trying to engage world paper dealers both here in the United States and all over to use it. So can you talk a little bit about how you personally use Banknote Book and how it compares to older, previous paper money catalogs?
So the one strength that I'll use it for regularly is just the ease of access and the data that's available. If I want to know, what's the specific prefixes that exist for this note, I can go into our library, find a really obscure book from the 70s to find that info, or I can do a couple simple computer clicks and look it up on a Banknote Book, and it will be there. So that's really the main, just use of information, especially when I'm cataloging and I need to, look up when an issue was withdrawn. Banknote Book has that info, and it's absolutely fantastic for that. And that's the kind of info that something like the PIC catalog does not have. They go into, obviously they describe it. Well, I can see that there's a lighthouse on a note. I don't really need to know. Sometimes it's nice to know what lighthouse it is. PIC is hit or miss if they'll list it. Banknote Book typically will. So it's that data, it's that information that's there. That's especially for us as an auctioneer when we're describing, an item. That's absolutely fantastic. So I use it every day, I'd say, pretty much, in some shape or form.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's just a tremendous resource for background information and historical context of notes, and And it is, I love reading about the like different personalities or architectural elements on a note or whatever it may be, or historical scene, stuff like that. So, what in your opinion, both auction companies and dealers to use the banknote book numbers as opposed to the pick number? Obviously, the pick numbers has been ingrained in the hobby for 45 years, 50 years almost. And of course, banknote book, we have our own numbering system. What do you think is either the biggest hindrance, or what do you think it would take to have more people adopt the banknote book number?
Well, I'm gonna have to be totally honest here. We don't, and typically in our auctions, we don't list the banknote book numbers.
Right.
The reason for that is we're limited in time. We're limited in how much time we can list, and my staff can use to list an item. So what happens is that they literally go by what's on the third-party grading company's holder.
Right.
They at this point list pick number, so that's what we use. If they switch or in addition start using the banknote book number, we'll add it, right away, because it won't cost us any more time. It's same kind of data entry. So I think the grading companies have a really big step and big role to play in this, by adding it on their holder. I think Banknote Book can facilitate that a little bit by becoming more complete. I know that there's certain countries that have not been tackled yet, and that's I think that's the biggest hindrance, because if the grading companies do what I think they typically do, and I have a pretty good understanding about them, they want consistency. And if they can use, Banknote Book for 80% of the time, or pick for 100% of the time, they're probably gonna, 98% of the time, they're gonna go with pick. So I think once Banknote Book expands and gets to that point where every country pretty much has a chapter, has dedicated catalog numbers, that are set in stone, and you can get the grading companies to come along, I think that will happen. But like you said, the pick book has been there for, gosh, 50 years now, 60 years. It will take a while for people. I'm sure in this business, we're pretty archaic in some ways, and it's hard
Absolutely.
to, yeah, and it's hard to get people to change. There's still plenty of dealers that don't accept third-party grading. So by the same token, it's going to take time. But I think those are the kind of things that Banknote Book should overcome.
Yeah.
And it's, I know you and I have talked about it before. I know I definitely talked about it with Owen before. It's just, for us, it's just simple time constraint. I cannot have, with the thousands of notes we receive every month, from all over the world, it's going to be very difficult to have somebody. I mean, I would have to hire somebody full time just to look up the Banknote Book numbers. It's undoable, unfortunately.
We have had extensive discussions with both PMG and PCGS Banknote already, and hopefully it's not too far off where we're able to make a breakthrough where they do start using it on their holders. And 2023, we're making a big push with Owen to complete the world. So I think there's a lot of really good things happening, and so hopefully it can happen.
I hope so, because particularly PMG now, they've started creating their own pick numbers.
Right.
And they don't match what's found online. It's just, I don't know how they come up with it. And it just confuses people. And confusing is the last thing this business needs, So hopefully, I would be excited to just start using the actual numbers and catalog numbers, once the grading services come on board.
Right. Well, speaking of confusing, we all know that pricing is by far the most difficult part, I think, of world paper money, because of how quickly things move. And as the collector base expands, there's so many more buyers, it seems, year over year. And for me, as someone who's been pricing the Greysheet for almost 8 years, and the Greensheet for United States paper money, I can say that pricing world paper is pretty much is quite a bit more difficult than pricing U.S. coins, for example. And within that, we've been adding and updating lots of prices in Banknote Book, constantly different chapters, adding prices for specimens, for instance, proofs. When you're evaluating notes for consignment or for auction or even buying for yourself, what's your kind of methodology for pricing notes? What are the tools that you use?
So my main tool is going to be auction records. It's going to be what something has actually sold for, with the caveat that auction records are just one moment in time. It's influenced by so many factors. Was somebody stuck in traffic and didn't make it to an auction? Were there two people in the room or bidding against each other that didn't like each other? You'll find those outliers. So typically you can find an average that will work for the more common material. Now, the stuff that sells infrequently, what's in rolled paper is a lot, it's going to get a little bit more tricky. So, I go into track and price. I'll see if there's anything out there. If there's not, it's going to go with the best guess. I remember probably 6 months ago now, we sold a Nicaragua commemorative that had not been traded since, I believe, don't hold me to this, 1981. And at the time, it brought $20. Well, the market has developed a little bit since 1981. So
Right.
yes, you're gonna have to go, and I think I estimated it $2,000 to $3,000. I mean, because it's unpriced in PIC, it's unpriced in Banknote Book. There's no sales results since 1981. There was allegedly one that sold privately. Well, that's the kind of information that I may be able to dig up, but it's a lot of pricing is a closely guarded secret. So
Right.
at that point, it's best guess. So for the more common material that does trade, a couple of times a year, track and price is typically my go-to. I have it up on my computer more than Banknote Book, honestly. I'm going to be totally honest, I don't use Banknote Book for pricing because I like seeing the actual data.
Right.
And then I use track and price as a start, and I'll actually, especially on the rarer notes, I'll find the actual auction catalog and see if it was described properly. Look at the picture,
Right.
Because more so than with coins, a book, not a book, a note that's graded a 20, well, it could be a 20 that's torn up and missing a corner, or it could be a beautiful 20 VF20 that's slightly circulated.
Yeah.
And so you're gonna have to, factor that. And I think I'm pretty good at pricing, but I get caught up. I'll price something at $3,000 to $5,000 and it will sell for $20,000.
Right.
Or I price something at $3,000 to $5,000 and I don't get any bids over $800. You just never know. And world paper is, as is probably the most difficult thing to price, which. If it was up to me, I didn't even use estimates or anything like that and just let it go.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the collectors, they do appreciate it. The people I've asked, so we continue doing it. But I can't imagine your job with Banknote Book where you have to go in and come up with a set value for 5 different grades. Because it's just I remember years ago I told Owen, when he was working on Banknote Book, and we were discussing pricing, and I told him just leave the pricing out and give him a subscription to Track and Price and be done with it, because that would literally, but I understand people want a figure that they can count on.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And as but maybe some of the viewers don't know, CDN also has acquired the World Paper Money module of Track and Price, and so along with Sandy Bashover, the founder of Track and Price, we manage it with him, and so there is definitely a plan to kind of integrate it all together, and a common subscription model that you just brought up, where you get access to Banknote Book and Track and Price, is definitely something that we've thought about and will hopefully implement in the future. So, and I think that'll be a tremendous help for dealers worldwide. But you are right as far as the static number in the Banknote Book, because when I'm doing it, I'm pricing the note for the collector, right? The guy who's at a show or at his house inventorying his collection, and just like what we say with the Greysheet, it's a guide, it's a starting point. So that number is just a starting point of what the note could be worth, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but like you say, it's a reference point where the collector can at least start. That's my philosophy and my mentality when I'm evaluating pricing.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people don't realize is that they're like, well, PicBook had good prices. Well, PicBook didn't have good prices. It never did. By the time the price was made and it was printed, it had already changed. Which that's why the concept of the Banknote Book, where it's a digital, it can be updated quicker. Of course, you're talking hundreds of thousands of different notes. It's going to be difficult to keep everything updated at a regular basis. But at least the banknote book has a better concept.
Right.
And the big catalog just got, in the end, people went in there, they used so-called outside experts that had their own agenda, that either
Right.
wanted to buy really cheap from the public, or they wanted to sell their items super high. So there's countries in there that I wouldn't pay 20% of pick. I wouldn't expect to get more than 25% of pick. There's also, I know there's notes in there for $400 that I've paid 10,000 for.
Yeah.
It's wildly inaccurate. So if anything, especially for the collector, having that pricing info in one spot, that's fairly accurate, but with the understanding that pricing is always just the best guess.
Yeah.
I think it would be very good for the hobby.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this, but my favorite story is when I started collecting, I still do. I do specialized issues, and that volume only came out like every 3 or 4 years, and from one volume to the next, I forget if it was 8 to 9 or 9 to 10, they repriced all the Russian specialized, and notes went from like $2 to like $90, and everyone was just like, "What on earth?" So you're totally right. I mean, it's just
Oh, I mean, there's this. I remember Memo. I think it's Memo. In the volume one.
yeah,
I believe at one point they forgot a comma or a decimal point, and so all the prices were 10 times as high. And everybody thought it was accurate. So I remember
yeah,
the Memo. Everybody wanted Memo all of a sudden. But that's the issue, and that's just, and once it's printed, I know that once it's printed, it's out there, and it's
it
not going to
becomes
be, yeah, it's not going to be easily corrected.
the myth becomes the fact.
Yeah,
And
and
to
that.
your point about the digital version, about Banknote Book being digital, like for instance, yesterday I just repriced a very large chunk of Central African states,
Mhm.
which, as you know, is a highly specialized area. I'm going to give those numbers to Owen, and by the middle of next week, there'll be a brand new PDF with all that updated pricing, within days.
Yeah,
And
and
so,
especially if you're, because there's especially with Central African states, West African states, there's so many different varieties.
right,
Uh, you have to be, especially with them, you have to be so very cautious, because the notes get misattributed all the time. I
yep,
mean, we see that, and there's some really, really tough varieties out there.
yeah,
Especially,
exactly,
and West African states is a bit more collected than Central African states, but
right,
you go in there, and you look at I don't know, Benin 1994, 2,000 francs, and there's just one signature variety that was used for a month. Well, that's going to be a very difficult note to find, and
right.
you may not even find any pricing info on it.
Exactly. So we're just trying to bring that information to people that, hey, they're not all the same. That's just one example of many. So great. So you recently announced that you are going to branch out into United States paper money,
Yes.
um, and your first two sales are now live on your website. I encourage everyone to check those out. What led to that decision to kind of jump into that arena?
So we've been offering US notes before, and people would always be surprised. And they weren't dedicated sales, they were included in our world sales, which I'm always have to go out and say, well, US is part of the world. So, that's why we're offering
Right.
them. There's two things that happened. First of all, in sale 29, I believe, we got a really strong collection of Confederate notes that came from a collector in the Middle East.
Oh,
And that kind of opened my eyes. It's like, well, you know what? There's just not just U.S. collectors collecting U.S. notes. There's people in the Middle East, people in China collecting world notes. Maybe we ought to do something with it. So we did get some requests for more specific items. And then something that happened more recently was that I hired a consignment director who's going to start next week. He's already been with me to the fun show, and he'll be at Long Beach. Who is a collector? He's always been a collector. He's retiring from a career in banking that he's done for 30 years, and he's eager to learn. And so he kind of contacted me, hey, do you have any positions open? And I was like, well, I've been wanting to dabble into US notes. This will be a great opportunity for everybody. Let's try this. So I brought him on board, and he's going to help me grow that division. I know US notes. I know enough to know, what's good, what's not good. I don't know all the market trends and exactly. So he's the one that's going to be working with that. So we got our first two sales up now. There's the first one is on February 24th, which is a US currency sale one, which is about 200 lots in it, ranging from encased postage to colonials to high denomination notes. We got a 5,000 in PMG 64. That's probably the highlight of that. And then the first collection Ryan sourced is the Navy Commander collection of national and gold banknotes, which we actually printed a catalog for that.
Oh, very cool.
When you said when we went off eBay, I kind of made the comment, we're not going to be a traditional auction house. We're not going to publish catalogs. Well, I realized there is a demand for it. And then I found out, as a company, we're perfectly suited to produce catalogs like this for one collection. Other auction houses, a lot of this stuff, the highlights, they put in one of their premier sales. The lesser notes, they're going to be filtered in group lots and all that.
Right.
I don't like doing that. I think it cheapens it. I think it's not fair to the collector who's, this guy's been spending 20 years of his life building this collection
Right.
of national and gold banknotes. So I decided that for special collections, we are printing catalogs. So this is the third one now. We did one for Jordan and one for a primarily Central and South American collection. And it's something that as a collector, if I were to sell a collection that I spent 30 years on, I like to have something that I can look back on that's in one place. And so that's why we kind of decided to do that. So we're hoping to do more of those in the future. And yeah, so that's the kind of how the US launch happened. It's all very recent, as you know. So far, the response has been very good. We've already started getting consignments for US currency sale too. Which our world sales are really on a very regular schedule every 3 weeks. It's what we do. Our US sales are probably going to be a little bit more infrequent in the beginning. I'm figuring every 4 to 6 weeks.
Sure.
But we are set up in such a way, you send us something now this week, it will be in the next sale. And you'll get the marketing and all that that the collection or your item deserves, which is how we got that 5,000, how we got some fancy serial numbers, some great errors in this first sale. Yeah, so I'm excited about that to grow that part. I'm still going to be focusing on world notes, which is what I know about, but with Ryan there, hopefully we'll be able to build that out and become a major player.
Awesome. Yeah, I love what you said. And I think about this actually a lot too over the past 5 years, is that there's so many Americans who collect, Mexico or China or Canada or wherever, Argentina. But there's a lot of people in other countries, right? They view US as just another part of the world. So it's like, and I always wondered about that, but it's very difficult to get information. And I'm glad that you said that about the Confederate notes. Do you think that there are a lot of people in other countries, not in the US, that collect US paper? What's your
Yes, so
feeling?
that's what I just found out over the past couple months, over the past 6 months, because we would get like this Confederate deal out of the Middle East, and then when we sold it, a fair bit went to U.S. dealers and collectors, but there were also people from Israel, people from China, people from all over that were bidding on it. And so I started looking at who was bidding on our U.S. notes, and it's a lot of people from basically all over. We've got we've done really well in the past with obsoletes, because mid 19th century US notes are very appealing. So we sell US obsoletes that collectors here would think, well, they're fairly common. We see them all the time. We got to remember, the people in Europe, they don't see them.
Right.
And they can acquire a 19th century obsolete remainder on New Orleans or some of the more common banks for less than $100.
Yeah.
Well, at the time, Europe didn't really have that much paper money, and most of it is going to be extremely rare.
Right.
So that's just a great opportunity, and I think that's why people in Europe and Asia, they really like it. And I think that it's, they are beautiful notes. I know that,
Yeah.
a lot of people, and that counts for, US large size. I mean, even US small size, we see it every day, but somebody from Europe, they're going to see it as infrequently as they'll see something from sub-Saharan Africa.
That's a very interesting point. That's really, really cool to think about, and yeah, it's fascinating. So as you've been kind of, and again, you've known about it for some time, but as you've been kind of delving in, what's your opinion of the size of the U.S. paper money market? Do you think it has a lot of room to expand? Because that's one thing that I hear sometimes, is that there's only so much material, and as the market expands, we've seen some really strong price movement over the past 2 years, and I can really only attribute that to an increase in the collector base.
Well, and that's, if you compare it to the world market, there's almost an infinite supply of US notes compared to world stuff.
Right.
I mean, we get notes in. I just picked one up last week. That's a note that has no pricing history on track and price. It's unpriced in PIC. There's absolutely nothing about it, yet it's a $3,000 item or $4,000 item. If there's going to be 3 or 4 wealthy collectors that are interested in that, those prices are going to show up. And that's, when it comes to world notes, that is really the one hurdle I see, is just lack of supply. US notes, there's a lot more, and there's, if you look at the populations, I think there's enough room that there's going to be, prices are going to keep on going up, I think, with the obvious market corrections that are going to come in over time. But there's enough out there that everybody can get a taste of a pie, especially compared to world notes, which makes, if you think about it, it really makes world currency such a great buy right now, because you can go 20 years, like that Nicaragua commemorative that hasn't been seen at auction for 40 years. Well, there's thousands of notes like that.
Yes.
So I think, for the US side, I think there's definitely room. Prices are going to go up, but I think that's healthy, and that's going to happen with everything. I don't think we're going to get into a scenario where you're going to have to wait 20 years to buy a large size silver certificate, of a certain kind.
Right.
I think there is more than enough supply there. It may, some rare varieties, it may happen, some signature varieties, some series that, you just never see. But those are always they would have been rare anyway. So I think having a new influx of collectors there is not particularly, going to restrain the market from growing or anything like that,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and with US, it seems like there's more turnover. Collectors are more, they're selling their collections kind of more regularly. Where sometimes with world notes, as you know, the stuff gets bought and taken off the market, and it just vanishes.
Oh yeah, no, I've run into that, and it's I don't collect a whole lot because I don't really like competing with my customers. There's a couple of things that I do buy. What I have, it could be 20 years before something else shows up.
Right.
Or and they're not particularly expensive or anything. It's just the supply is not there.
Right.
There's a lot of people like that. They'll buy something, and 40 years later, and it's gone. And eventually it will show back up. It has to. But it's gonna take a lot of time. And like you said, the US market, just because people know, and I think that's also because of we are in the US. So if a son or a daughter, after the passing of a collector, runs into a collection of US notes, they're going to know that they need to, get that checked out, and hopefully that collector has plans in place and instructions in place. But if they don't, at least they know that, hey, these are old US money, this may be worth something.
Right.
Well, if they see something that looks like an old newspaper that's scribbled on, from Venezuela from the 19th century, they're not necessarily going to know that item is worth, 5 or 6 figures. So it just may take a longer time for that to reappear.
Absolutely. And one thing that I think too is, like, some of the notes that I chase, is that they might show up in an auction in another country.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll never even see it. You'll never even be aware of that it's sold. So it's just
Which,
fascinating to think about.
yeah, and the internet has made that better. But there's still times I miss auctions, and I've got a pretty good grasp on it.
Yeah,
But there is something like said that will show up in Germany in a little auction that I've never heard of, and there's some people that's what they do, and eventually it will come back into the more mainstream market.
right,
But yeah, that does happen all the time.
right, absolutely. Well, Dennis, this has really been great. Cool information. I mean, I love world paper money as you do too, so much because there's so much variety and the market is just very exciting and international. Is there any closing remarks you'd like to add or anything you'd like to throw
Well,
out?
thanks for having me again. I think for us as a company, 2023 is going to be very exciting. Obviously, the brands out into US notes and these sales that we've got. At the end of May, probably the end of May, I haven't quite decided on the timing yet. We'll be offering the Isabella Cheng Fong, sorry, and Ian Marshall collection of Jamaica,
Oh,
which is the world's best collection of Jamaica notes ever assembled. It goes back to
wow.
the 1820s. Government issues, it's complete except for one note, which is unique. So that's going to be a very exciting sale. I
Wow.
can't wait to share some of those things. That's in grading right now, and we hope to get them back soon. You'll see advertisements and eventually a printed catalog for that. So, and then yeah, we'll continue growing. We'll continue having our regular sales. Obviously, continue working with Banknote Book and providing info and data and all that. So yeah, I'm excited about what this year will bring, and I think the hobby is strong. Both the world and the US side. There's always going to be ups and downs, but I see especially outside of the US, in Asia and in Europe, I see a strong influx of new young collectors. And that just can only mean that the market's good, and the market's just active, and that's good for all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, great. Well, have a great weekend. And again, for our audience, thank you for watching. Again, please remember to check out our past episodes on the Greysheet YouTube channel, and we will be back with another great interview before you know it. Thanks, everyone.